The days that followed the first mistake felt like walking through a fog. Peter moved through the house with quiet resentment, his mind replaying every late night, every whisper he hadn't heard, every moment Mabel had chosen ambition over transparency. Each step he took felt heavy, weighted with things left unsaid. He tried to act normal in front of friends and family, but even laughter became foreign, a mask he couldn't fully wear. Mabel, on her side, carried a burden of guilt she hadn't anticipated. She had thought her choices were clever, protective, even loving. But now she understood the gravity of what she had done. Every time she looked at Peter, she saw the cracks forming in his expression, the guarded way he approached her. She wanted to reach out, to speak, to pour her heart wide open, but fear stopped her. Fear that the wrong words would push them further apart. Fear that the damage was already too great to mend. And so the quiet continued, a silence that was more suffocating than any argument, more powerful than any gesture of love. They existed in the same space, but lived in separate worlds. Peter in the realm of betrayal and disappointment, Mabel in the world of ambition and regret. Both wanted to reach the other, but neither knew the path back. It was in this silence that the next set of mistakes crept in. Small decisions, seemingly innocent, began to undermine them further. Mabel started staying late at the office more frequently, often returning home past midnight. She told herself it was necessary for her growth, for their future, for the life they had dreamed of. But Peter saw it differently. Every late night was a reminder of distance, of secrets kept, of trust compromised. He stopped asking questions, stopped expressing concern, and began keeping a journal of his own thoughts, a private witness to the unraveling of their marriage. Arguments became more frequent, more intense, and yet oddly hollow. They shouted, not out of anger alone, but out of frustration with themselves, with the circumstances, and with each other. The smallest disagreements, what to eat, how to pay bills, which movie to watch, became battlegrounds. Both of them fought, not to win, but because they were desperate to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel like they mattered to the other person. Mabel noticed the change in Peter. The warmth she once relied upon was gone, replaced by quiet observation. He was present, but only in the physical sense. Emotionally, he had withdrawn into a place she could not reach, and she in turn responded the way people often do when afraid of loss. She pushed harder. She worked harder. She smiled more. She tried to fill the void with effort. But effort cannot replace connection. Effort cannot rebuild trust once it has been fractured. One night, after another long day filled with tension, Peter confronted her. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of months of disappointment. "Why do you keep hiding things from me, Mabel? Why can't you just tell me?" Mabel's eyes filled with tears, but she held back. She wanted to explain, to pour out everything she had felt and done, but the words seemed inadequate. "I thought I was protecting us. I wanted to make sure we were safe, that we were secure." Peter shook his head slowly. "Protection? By hiding things from me? By making choices without me?" She couldn't answer. The truth was complicated. Her intentions were good, but the consequences had become a storm she could not control. And Peter, for his part, realized that love was no longer enough. He had loved her through silence, through half-truths, through the small betrayals that now loomed large. But even love has limits, especially when trust is compromised repeatedly. From that night on, the house became a battlefield of passive aggression and small resentments. Peter stopped initiating conversation, Mabel stopped volunteering information. Each lived in fear of the other's reactions, both convinced that any misstep could ignite another fight. And in that fear, their love shrank, retreating from the open spaces of the home into corners where it could no longer breathe freely. Speculatively, one might say that this is where many marriages begin their downward spiral. It is not the big betrayals that destroy. It is the accumulation of small fractures, left unchecked. One lie, one omission, one misinterpreted gesture becomes the seed of mistrust. And when both partners are afraid to communicate honestly, the seeds grow into walls that are hard to tear down. Mabel, desperate to reclaim a sense of control, made another choice, one that she believed would help, but instead pushed them further apart. She engaged with an outside advisor for her project, someone who didn't know Peter personally. She believed the advisor's involvement was necessary, that it would secure her dreams and, indirectly, their future. But again, she didn't tell Peter. And when Peter found out, as he inevitably did, the distance between them became nearly insurmountable. By now, their arguments were no longer about specific incidents. They were about everything, about fear, ambition, pride, and disappointment. A glance could spark an argument. A tone of voice could trigger a battle. The home, once a sanctuary, had become a place of emotional warfare. Yet amidst the chaos, both Peter and Mabel were trying, desperately, clumsily, to hold on to something they both knew was slipping away. And there were moments, fleeting and rare, when the old love flickered. Peter would catch her looking out the window, her eyes distant, and remember the laughter they once shared. Mabel would see him lost in thought, remembering the small gestures of care he had given her over the years. These moments were brief, like sparks in a dark room, but they reminded them both of what had been and what could still be if only they found the courage to bridge the distance. But courage is hard when fear is present, and fear had settled into their marriage like an uninvited guest. Every decision Mabel made was tinged with fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of losing what she loved. And every decision Peter made was tinged with the same. Fear of betrayal, fear of disappointment, fear that the home he had cherished was slipping through his fingers. As time passed, small mistakes accumulated. A forgotten promise, a raised voice over trivial matters, a misunderstanding turned into a silent grudge. Each acted like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples that neither could control. And in this emotional turbulence, the real tragedy unfolded. Their love, though present, was buried under layers of hurt, pride, and miscommunication. Speculatively, it can be assumed that this is where many couples find themselves trapped, aware of the problem but unable to act without risking further damage. Peter and Mabel were caught in that liminal space, both willing to fight for their marriage but unsure of how to navigate the minefield of their own emotions. And so the pattern continued. Each day brought small battles. Each night carried quiet regrets. They both yearned for connection, yet the weight of past choices made it nearly impossible. Their home, their love, and their dreams all hung by threads, fraying with each passing day. By the time the next month rolled in, Peter and Mabel were no longer the couple people remembered. The laughter that had once echoed through their home was replaced by quiet footsteps and careful glances. Every interaction was calculated, measured, as if one wrong move could ignite a fire that neither could control. And in some ways, it already had. Mabel tried desperately to justify herself, to prove that her choices were made for both their benefit. She spent hours explaining budgets, plans, and projections. She thought if Peter could only see the logic, the reasoning, the necessity of what she was doing, he would forgive her. But forgiveness is not born from reason alone. It is born from understanding, and understanding cannot exist when the foundation of trust has been shaken. Peter listened, nodded, sometimes even smiled, but inside, the wound had grown. It was no longer a small cut that could heal. It had become a scar, raw and tender, sensitive to every movement, every word. He began noticing the little things he hadn't before. The way Mabel's phone never left her hand, the sudden trips she took, the tiny omissions in her explanations. Each small thing was magnified through the lens of betrayal, and the lens, once clear, was now cracked. One evening, after another tense dinner, Peter finally voiced what had been building inside him. His voice was calm, but the words carried a weight she could not ignore. "Mabel, I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I feel like I'm losing you, like I've been losing you for a long time and I didn't even know it." Mabel's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to explain, to beg him to understand, but the words caught like a stone in her chest. I didn't mean to. I thought I was protecting us. But Peter could not hear it that way anymore. In his mind, protection without trust was nothing but deception. And in that instant, the fragile walls of their relationship cracked even further. Speculatively, it is clear that this is a common turning point in many marriages. One partner believes they are acting in the other's best interest, while the other interprets those actions as secrecy, dishonesty, or betrayal. Both intentions are valid, but the misalignment creates a chasm that is difficult to cross without courage, humility, and openness. From that night, Mabel began noticing how Peter's presence felt distant, even in the same room. He no longer laughed at her jokes. He no longer asked about her day. He had become a man watching, waiting, analyzing, and the warmth they had once shared was now a memory. Mabel tried everything to reconnect, small gestures, handwritten notes, gifts, but each attempt seemed to emphasize the distance rather than bridge it. The tension spilled into their friends' circles. Casual dinners, friendly outings, visits from family. Each event became a silent battlefield. People noticed. Some asked questions, tried to offer advice, but Mabel and Peter only smiled politely, keeping the truth hidden behind practiced expressions. But the truth has a way of leaking out, and soon those closest to them could sense the fractures growing wider. And then the first irreversible mistake happened. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, and it wasn't planned. It was a moment of weakness, a split-second decision made in fear and frustration. Mabel, exhausted from trying to prove herself, decided to bypass Peter completely in a matter that involved both their finances. She signed a contract, sent documents, and committed them to an agreement without consulting him. In her mind, it was necessary. She told herself that if Peter trusted her enough, he would forgive her after seeing the outcome. But she did not anticipate the magnitude of what she had done. For Peter, this was more than a breach of trust. It was a confirmation that their partnership had been undermined. The foundation, already shaky, collapsed under the weight of her action. Peter discovered the contract 2 days later. The shock hit him like a wave, pulling all the anger, frustration, and disappointment he had buried to the surface at once. Words were not enough. Yelling was not enough. The quiet, polite arguments of the past weeks escalated into raw, unrestrained confrontation. "How could you make this decision without me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Everything we built, everything we promised each other, was it worth nothing?" Mabel, for the first time in months, felt her control slip. She wanted to cry, to explain, to reach for him, but he stepped back. The emotional distance that had been growing finally became a physical space she could not cross. She realized, with a painful clarity, that her choice, however well-intentioned, had set them on a path from which there was no easy return. From that night onward, their marriage existed in a state of quiet war. Each interaction, no matter how small, was scrutinized. Every gesture, every word, every pause carried meaning, often the wrong meaning. They spoke, yes, but they spoke with caution, as if one wrong phrase could undo whatever fragile piece remained. And in that cautious communication, intimacy was lost, replaced by suspicion, fear, and resentment. Speculatively, this stage demonstrates how small mistakes, compounded by secrecy and pride, can escalate into irreversible damage. Both Peter and Mabel acted out of love and care, yet both miscalculated the consequences. This is the cruel irony of marriage. Intentions, no matter how pure, are insufficient without transparency, humility, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths together. And yet, even in the midst of the storm, moments of tenderness remained. Peter would occasionally glance at Mabel and remember the woman he fell in love with. Her energy, her courage, the way she had once made life feel limitless. Mabel would catch Peter lost in thought and see the man who had once been her anchor, the man whose calm presence had steadied her in moments of fear. But these glimpses were fleeting. The distance they had created was not easily erased. Weeks turned into months. The house, once full of warmth, was now a place of silent tension. Meals were eaten in separate rooms. Conversations were minimal. Nights were spent in solitude, each partner lost in their own thoughts, replaying the events that had led them here. And in the midst of it all, both Peter and Mabel realized something chilling. Love was still present, but it was trapped beneath layers of hurt, fear, and regret. By the time the next confrontation came, it was inevitable. The mistakes had accumulated like snow, each one heavier than the last, until the weight of the past could no longer be carried quietly. One argument, one misinterpreted gesture, one failure to forgive, and the consequences would ripple outward, touching everything they had built together. This was the stage of no return. The first major, irreversible mistake had been made. The marriage, though not yet ended, was forever changed. And in that change lay the heart of the tragedy, not a single act, not a loud betrayal, but the slow, relentless accumulation of small decisions, missteps, and silences that had grown into a storm neither could withstand alone.